The November sun was barely breaking through the heavy clouds, casting its feeble rays on my front porch. I sat in the old rocking chair that Viola had once given me for my 50th birthday and watched the red maple leaf slowly drift to the ground. My life, too, had become like that leaf, a lonely, unhurried movement toward finality. My name is Ebner Hawksworth, and I turned 68 this year. For the past 5 years since Viola's death, I have lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Saltville. Many people think I'm a weirdo. I prefer old clothes to new, fix anything that breaks, and haven't replaced furniture in decades. My TV remembers the last century, and my phone is just an ordinary corded model without any clever features. But I like my simple life. I reach for the cup of tea on the small table next to me. Viola always made peppermint tea, saying it cleared my thoughts. I continue that tradition, though no one but her has ever understood my love of peppermint tea, especially my son. Quentin was born when Viola and I were still very young. We rejoiced at every move he made, every word he said. I worked my ass off trying to provide for my family. We lived modestly, but I always found a way to save small sums for investments. Viola supported me, even though at times we had to economize on everything. I still remember her words. Ebner, wealth is not in what we spend, but in what we value. That philosophy became the foundation of my life. As Quentin grew older, he began to feel ashamed of our lifestyle. In high school, he avoided inviting friends over to his house. One day I overheard him on the phone saying, "I can't tonight. My old man will be home." He's a real cheapskate, you know that. Those words crashed into my memory like a shard of glass. I got up from the chair and went into the house. It was warm inside, thanks to the old but reliable fireplace. There were pictures on the mantelpiece. Viola on our wedding day, little Quentin on his tricycle, Viola and me on our silver wedding day, and separately a photo of Theodore, my only grandson. He's 14 now, and I see him less often than I'd like. After Viola died 5 years ago, our relationship with Quentin became even more strained. He came to the funeral with his wife Sabrina and the then 10-year-old Theodore, but he kept his distance. When I suggested they stay for a few days, Sabrina said they had to return immediately, some important business in their social circle. I took the hint. Sabrina Moffat, now Hawksworth, had always seemed like a stranger to me. A tall, slender woman with impeccable hair and cold eyes. She came from a family where there was never any money, which was probably why she was so desperate for luxury and social acceptance. Quentin, who worked as a lawyer in a large firm, was her ticket to the world she dreamed of. I poured myself some tea and sat down at the old desk. I took out a tattered notebook where I kept track of my investments. In 50 years, the small sums had grown into a fortune that no one but my attorney, Waldor Peabody, and me knew about. Even Viola had no idea how successful my investments in real estate in the 80s and in technology companies in the 90s and 2000. I never saw the point of changing my lifestyle. Why do I need a huge house if I live alone? Why do I need a new car when my old Honda is doing just fine? Viola understood my philosophy, although she sometimes joked that we could afford a trip to Hawaii. I had promised her that trip for our 40th wedding anniversary, but 3 months before that date, she left, taking a piece of my soul with her. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my musings. I took my time answering it, knowing it was unlikely to be anything important, probably just another marketer or an automated call. But the phone kept ringing insistently, and I finally picked it up. "Grandpa?" Theodore's voice sounded excited. "Is that you?" "Yes, Theo." I smiled involuntarily. My grandson was the only one who called me for no reason at all. "How are you?" "I'm okay. Listen, Grandpa, I've been thinking, dash." He paused and I heard someone talking in the background. "Mom and Dad and I want to invite you to Thanksgiving. Can you come?" I froze. Thanksgiving with Quentin's family? The last time that happened, I can't even remember. I think it was when Viola was alive. Dash, Grandpa, are you there?" Theodore sounded worried. "Yes, Theo, I'm here. I'm just, a little surprised." I coughed. "Thanksgiving, you say?" "Yeah, it's gonna be great. Mom's cooking a turkey, and there's going to be pumpkin pies, and—" I heard the voice in the background again, more clearly now. Sabrina. She was saying something to Theodore, but I couldn't make out the words. Mom says you should definitely come, Theodore continued. She says the family should be together on a day like this. Sabrina says that? That's new. In all the years I've known her, she's never once shown a sincere desire to have me in her house. Tell Mom I appreciate the invitation, I said gently, but I'm not sure I can. Please, grandfather, Theodore interrupted me. I really want you to come. I have something I want to show you. His enthusiasm was contagious. Despite all my doubts, I felt something warm stirring in my chest. My only grandson wanted to see me. It meant more to me than he could have ever imagined. Okay, Theo, I said at last. I'll be there. Yay, he exclaimed. I'll tell Mom and Dad. They'll be glad. I doubt it, I thought, but I said aloud, and I'll be glad to see you all. After we'd settled on the details, Theodore said goodbye, and the phone buzzed. I slowly put the phone down and went back to the window. Outside, the rain began to drizzle, the drops drumming on the glass in an uneven rhythm. Thanksgiving with my family. Part of me was excited to see Theodore, to spend time with him, but the other part felt anxious. Quentin always looked at me with poorly concealed disappointment, and Sabrina didn't even try to hide her disdain. What was different now? Why the sudden desire to see me at the holiday table? I thought back to the last Thanksgiving we'd spent with Viola. She had cooked a small turkey, too much for two people, but she always said a holiday should be a holiday. We sat around the table holding hands, and we each said what we were thankful for this year. Viola said then, I'm thankful for you, Ebner. For every day with you. I brushed away an unsolicited tear. Without her, the holidays were meaningless. But maybe for Theodore's sake, it would be worth trying to recapture some of the warmth we'd once shared with Viola. I looked at the calendar. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away. Enough time to prepare myself mentally to meet my son and his wife. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Quentin would probably be showing off his success again. Expensive watches, talking about important clients, a new car. Sabrina would glitter with diamonds and smile condescendingly at my shabby jacket and old-fashioned shoes. But for Theodore's sake, I was willing to endure. I saw echoes of Viola in him, the same sincere smile, the same kind eyes. Sometimes I thought he had inherited more from his grandmother than from his own parents. I went back to my chair and opened my notebook again. The numbers spoke for themselves. I could buy Quentin and Sabrina's house without noticing the waste. I could buy the car my son had only dreamed of. I could have traveled around the world in first class, but instead I lived in a small house in Saltville, drove an old Honda, and wore sweaters that Viola had hand-knitted years ago. Not because I couldn't afford more. It was because I'd learned to appreciate just that. I closed the book and put it away in my desk drawer. Then I walked over to Viola's picture and ran my finger gently across the glass. What would you say, darling? I whispered. Should I go? Of course, the photograph was silent, but somewhere in the back of my mind I knew the answer. Viola had always believed in family, always hoped that Quentin would one day grow up and realize that true values were not measured in money. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I would go to Thanksgiving not only for Theodore's sake, but also for Viola's memory, and perhaps, somewhere in the back of my mind, for the faint hope that my son would finally see me not as a stingy old man, but as a man who had spent his life putting family before material possessions. But that hope was as faint as a fading candle flame in the wind. I knew my son and his wife too well to seriously expect change, and yet, I decided to give them another chance. With these thoughts, I turned back to the window. The rain had intensified, turning the street into a blurry blur of gray and brown. Thanksgiving. Family. A holiday that's supposed to unite. Will I be able to find reasons to be thankful at this table, among people who see me only as a burden? An old-fashioned, curmudgeonly old man? The phone rang again, but this time I didn't go over. Some decisions require silence and solitude, and I had just made one of the hardest decisions I'd made in years. To return to a family that had long since ceased to be mine. Thanksgiving morning was unexpectedly clear for November. The sun peeked timidly through the windows of my house, as if to remind me that even in the darkest months, there is light. I woke up early, although I had planned to leave only by noon. My lifelong habit of getting up at first light had not disappeared even after retirement. The forthcoming trip to my son caused mixed feelings. I slowly packed a small bag, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, the blood pressure medication Dr. Abbott had prescribed. Nothing extra, another habit from a time when every dollar counted. As I packed everything I needed, I thought about a gift for Theodore. What can you get a 14-year-old these days? Today's kids are interested in gadgets and computer games, and I didn't even know what was in fashion right now. I made my way into the small living room and knelt down in front of an old oak dresser. On the bottom shelf, behind a stack of winter sweaters, was a carved dark wood jewelry box. Viola had always called it Ebner's treasure box. I carefully pulled the box out and set it on the coffee table. Inside were a few family heirlooms, my mother's wedding ring, a few old photographs, Viola's letters from our engagement, and my grandfather Sebastian Hawksworth's pocket watch. I gently took the watch in my hands. The engraved silver case was tarnished with age, but the movement inside still worked perfectly. I wound it every week, though I rarely took it out of the box. On the inside of the lid was engraved the words, "Time is precious, but it is how we spend it that is most precious." These words became our family motto, at least for me and my ancestors. Grandfather Sebastian was a simple man, a railroad engineer. He received this watch as a reward for 40 years of perfect service and was very proud of it. Before he died, he passed it on to me, saying that of all his grandchildren, I was the one who had inherited his attitude to time and life. I remember trying to give it to Quentin on his 18th birthday. He looked at it with undisguised contempt. "Is this a joke, Dad?" he asked then. "An old, worn-out watch?" "It's not just a clock, Quentin," I tried to explain. "It's part of our family history. Your great-grandfather." "My great-grandfather was a poor railroad man," he interrupted me. "And you want me to wear this poor man's junk to make my friends laugh?" Viola tried to intervene, but it was too late. Quentin threw the watch back in the box and left the room. And the next day he showed us the new wristwatch he'd bought himself, a shiny imitation of an expensive brand that broke after 6 months. I sighed, coming back from my memories to the present. The clock in my hand ticked quietly, counting down the seconds, the minutes, the years. Perhaps Theodore would prove to be more receptive to family history than his father. After all, he was the one who'd insisted on inviting me to Thanksgiving. It was decided. I carefully placed the watch in the small velvet pouch Viola had once sewn especially for it and tucked it into the breast pocket of my jacket. It was closer to his heart now, both literally and figuratively. There were still a few hours left before I had to leave, so I decided to have a cup of coffee on the porch. The morning air was fresh and cool, with the light scent of fallen leaves. I sat, warming my hands against the hot cup, and thought about the upcoming meeting. Quentin and Sabrina's house was in Riverbend, about 3 hours from Saltville. It was an upscale suburb with big houses and manicured lawns. My old car would look like an alien from another world there. I remembered the first time I'd seen their house, a huge 3-story mansion with columns and French windows. Quentin had been proud to give Viola and me a tour. Sabrina kept mentioning how much this or that item cost, as if the price tag determined its value. Viola squeezed my hand tightly, silently asking me not to comment. I kept silent, but inside I was seething at the thought that my son hadn't understood the main lesson we were trying to teach him. After finishing my coffee, I went back into the house and checked that everything was turned off and locked. Then I grabbed my bag, locked the door with 2 turns of the key, and headed for the garage. My 98-year-old Honda greeted me with the familiar creak of the door. The old girl, as I called her, had already traveled over 300,000 kilometers with me, but it was still reliable. I could have bought a new car at any time. Money allowed me to choose any model. But why? This car performed its function properly, and I was comfortable driving it. When I got on the highway, I turned on the radio. An old song from the 70s was playing, reminding me of my youth. Back then, at the age of 23, I was just starting out on my journey. After college, which I graduated from thanks to a scholarship, I took a job with a small construction company. The pay was modest, but I worked hard and saved every extra dollar. Viola, whom I had met in high school, supported me in everything. She worked at the library and brought home books on investments and finance, which I avidly studied in the evenings. My first serious investment was buying a small piece of land on the outskirts of Saltville. Many people thought it was crazy, a backwoods location with no utilities. But 3 years later, a new apartment complex was being built next to that plot of land. and the value of the land increased fivefold. I sold the plot and invested the money in the shares of several promising companies. One of them was a small technology firm that the whole world knows now. I bought its shares at a ridiculous price and held them for years, despite all the ups and downs. Those shares were now a large part of my portfolio and worth hundreds of times what I paid for them. But I had never aspired to luxury. My childhood was spent in poverty. My father worked in a factory, my mother sewed part-time. We lived from paycheck to paycheck, and I remember my mother crying when there was nothing left in the refrigerator but half a bottle of milk and stale bread. These memories taught me to value financial stability above all else. When Quentin was born, Viola and I vowed that he would never know such need. We provided him with everything he needed: good clothes, a quality education, the opportunity to play sports and music. But we didn't spoil him with excesses, didn't buy him expensive toys just because he wanted them. We tried to teach him to appreciate labor and understand the true value of things. Somewhere we went wrong. Instead of gratitude for stability, Quentin grew up with the belief that we were depriving him of a normal childhood because of my pathological stinginess. He never learned that all this time there was a trust fund growing in his name that could have provided him a trouble-free existence. When Quentin enrolled in a prestigious university, I paid his tuition in full, even though he thought the money came from an educational loan. I wanted him to start an independent life without debt, but I didn't want him to know about my condition. I was afraid that this knowledge would change him, make him even more arrogant and detached from reality. Later, when he married Sabrina, I secretly paid for most of their wedding by funneling the money through the account of Viola's sister, who was aware of my financial affairs. Quentin and Sabrina thought the bride's parents had spent a fortune on the celebration. I didn't bother to dissuade them. The highway gradually filled with cars. People were going to their relatives for the party. Shiny new cars whizzed past me, their drivers sometimes casting surprised glances at my old Honda. It didn't bother me. Viola often said, "A car is just a way to get from point A to point B, and life is what happens at the destinations." I pulled into a gas station to stretch my legs and grab a coffee. It was full of people inside, families with children, elderly couples, young people. All of them were rushing somewhere on this festive day. I watched them, standing in line for coffee, and thought about how differently we all perceived life and values. The young woman in front of the cash register was arguing with the clerk over a few cents change. Next to her, a boy of about 10 was shuffling from foot to foot, clearly embarrassed by his mother's behavior. I couldn't help but think of Quentin at that age. He too was always embarrassed when I checked receipts at the store or returned defective merchandise. "Dad, come on, it's only $5, he would say. He never realized that it wasn't about the amount, it was about the principle. Back in the car with my coffee, I continued on my way. The sign on the highway announced that it was 120 kilometers to Riverbend, about an hour and a half more, and I would be at my son's house. I thought about how our relationship would have turned out if I had told Quentin about my investments and fortune from the beginning. Perhaps he would have been proud of me, or would he have simply demanded more and more money, believing it to be his birthright? I'll never know the answer to that question, but one thing I knew for sure: I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. I wanted my son to respect me as a person, not as a source of funding for his ambitions. Perhaps it was naive, but I still held to that principle. Viola understood me. She had never aspired to luxury, though I had offered her expensive jewelry, travel, and a new home. "Why do we need all this?" she asked. "We're happy as we are." And it was true. We were happy in our little house, with our simple pleasures and quiet evenings by the fireplace. My only regret was that I hadn't had time to show her the world as I had promised. We had planned to travel after retirement, but illness took her too soon. The road ran along a scenic river, and I found myself involuntarily admiring the scenery. The bare branches of the trees stood out clearly against the clear sky, and the river glistened in the sunlight. Viola loved such views. "Nature is the most precious art," she used to say, and I thought again how right she was. An hour later, I turned off the highway onto the road leading to Riverbend. The scenery began to change. There were large private homes, perfectly mowed lawns, and expensive cars in the driveways. Quentin and Sabrina lived in the most upscale part of town, in a neighborhood the locals called the Hills. I drove past a huge supermarket, crowded in anticipation of the holiday, and turned onto a street with the beautiful name Maple Grove. The irony was that there wasn't a single maple tree on this street, just perfectly even rows of some ornamental trees that never seemed to lose their leaves. Quentin and Sabrina's house stood almost at the end of the street, a large white mansion with columns and a wide porch. There was a circular driveway in front of the house, framed by immaculately trimmed bushes. I parked my Honda next to Quentin's black SUV and Sabrina's silver sports car. My car looked so out of place here that it was even funny. I turned off the engine and sat for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts. The grandfather clock ticked quietly in the breast pocket of my jacket. Its rhythm soothed me, reminding me that some things are timeless principles, values, love for loved ones. I remembered how Viola always said before difficult meetings, "Be yourself, Ebner. That's all that's required of you." I smiled at that memory. Being yourself was the simplest yet most difficult piece of advice. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car, retrieved my bag from the back seat, and headed for the front door. On the porch, I stopped for a second, listening. From inside came voices, music, and the clinking of dishes. The family feast was in full swing. I touched the watch once more through the fabric of my jacket, as if drawing strength from it. Then I adjusted my shirt collar and pressed the bell button. The door opened almost immediately, and Theodore appeared on the threshold. His face broke into a wide smile when he saw me. "Grandfather, you've come!" he exclaimed and rushed to embrace me. At that moment, all my doubts and anxieties receded. For the sake of this embrace, for the sake of this sincere joy, it was worth overcoming any distance and inconvenience. After all, isn't that what family's all about? Being there for each other no matter what? I hugged my grandson back, feeling how much he had grown in the time we hadn't seen each other. And in that moment, I firmly decided that I would never tell him about my condition. Not out of stubbornness or pride, but out of a desire to be loved for who I was, not what I had. I wanted Theodore's sincerity to never be clouded by thoughts of inheritance or gain. I wanted to be just a grandfather, not a millionaire in shabby clothes. Stepping into Quentin and Sabrina's house, I immediately felt like a stranger. The crystal chandelier, the marble floor, the antique furniture, everything screamed wealth and status. Theodore was still holding my hand, his eyes glowing with genuine joy. The contrast between his warm welcome and the cold atmosphere of the house was stark. "Daddy, Mommy, Grandpa's here!" shouted Theodore into the depths of the house. Quentin appeared from the living room with a glass of whiskey in his hand. My son looked impeccable. Perfectly ironed shirt, expensive watch, fashionable haircut. But his smile didn't touch his eyes when he saw me. "Father," he nodded, "mine is glad you could make it." His tone said otherwise. I could hear the forced politeness in it and something else. Impatience? Irritation? I couldn't pinpoint it. "Hello, Quentin." I tried to smile. "Thank you for inviting me." "It was Theodore's idea," he clarified quickly, as if relieved of responsibility. Sabrina came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, a designer apron, I noticed, more for looks than to actually protect her clothes. Her face was a look of restrained displeasure, as if my arrival had disrupted some plan. "Ebner," she said, making no attempt to move closer for a greeting. "I trust the journey was not tiring." "Not at all," I replied. "The weather's good, the highway's clear. In your car?" She sounded utterly contemptuous. "I'm surprised she's still walking." "The Honda is a reliable car," I replied simply. "Never let me down." Sabrina exchanged a quick glance with Quentin, and I caught some secret communication that eluded me. "Grandpa, come on, I'll show you my room." Theodore tugged at my sleeve, clearly sensing the tension between the adults. "Theodore, let Grandpa at least take off his jacket." Sabrina pulled him back. "And anyway, you shouldn't drag your guests upstairs right away. It's rude." "It's all right," I interjected. "I'd love to see Theo's room." "You need to see the guest bedroom first," Sabrina insisted. "Quentin, show your father out." My son set his glass on the table with obvious reluctance. "Sure. This way, Dad." I followed him up the wide staircase to the second floor. The walls were adorned with expensive framed family photos. Quentin, Sabrina, and Theodore, in various scenic locations. I noticed that none of them had me or Viola in them. The guest room appeared spacious and impersonal, like a high-end hotel room. Beige walls, white linens, minimalist furniture. The bathroom is over there. Quentin pointed to a door in the corner. Dinner will be ready in an hour. Make yourself comfortable. He was just turning to leave when I asked, "How are you doing, son? How's work?" Quentin froze for a second, then shrugged. "It's all good. Lots of work. Lots of clients. The usual routine. And Theodore, how's his schooling?" "Fine," Quentin answered without enthusiasm. "He could try harder, but he's not bad for his age." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. It was as if a wall had grown between us that I couldn't break through with simple questions. "Well then, I'll see you at dinner," Quentin finally said and walked out, closing the door tightly behind him. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling a strange emptiness inside. What am I doing here? Why did I come here? These people are my family in blood only, not in spirit. Viola would know what to say, how to lighten the mood, how to connect. Without her, I felt lost. There was a quiet knock on the door, and Theodore peeked into the room. "May I?" he asked in a whisper. "Sure, Theo." I patted the bed beside me. "Come on in." My grandson slipped into the room and sat down next to me. He'd grown since the last time I'd seen him, and his features were already showing future adult contours, but his eyes were still as open and inquisitive as when he was a child. "Mom said I shouldn't bother you," he admitted. "But I'm so glad you've come." "I'm glad to see you, too," I said sincerely. "Tell me, how are you doing? What are you doing now?" Theodore became animated and began to tell me about school, friends, and his passion for astronomy. He spoke quickly, jumping from topic to topic, as if he was afraid he wouldn't have time to tell everything. I listened, enjoying his enthusiasm, which reminded me so much of young Viola. "I've also started saving money," Theodore said proudly. "I already have almost $400. I want to buy a good telescope." "That's wonderful," I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Thrift is a good habit." "Dad says it's a waste of time," Theodore added quietly. "He thinks it's better spent on entertainment. And Mom says I can just ask them for money for a telescope." I frowned. Quentin's habits and values were even further from mine than I'd thought. "You know, Theo," I said, lowering my voice, "your great-great-grandfather Sebastian always said, 'A dollar saved is more valuable than a dollar earned because it has a piece of your willpower in it.'" The boy's eyes widened. "Really? Do you know anything else about great-great-grandpa?" I smiled and pulled a velvet pouch out of my pocket. "Actually, I have something for you, something special that belonged to your great-great-great-grandfather." I carefully removed the pocket watch and placed it in Theodore's outstretched hands. He looked at it with genuine admiration. "Wow, a real antique watch. It must be 100 years old." "Almost," I confirmed. "And it's still accurate." Theodore carefully opened the lid and read the engraving inside. "Time is precious, but more precious is how we spend it," he said slowly. "It's so deep." "Your father didn't want to take them," I decided to be honest. "Said they were old junk, but I think you can appreciate them." "They're amazing." Theodore gave me a big hug. "Thank you, Grandpa. I'll cherish them for the rest of my life." At that moment, the door opened abruptly and Sabrina appeared on the doorstep. "Theodore!" she exclaimed. "I told you not to bother Grandpa." "It's all right," I assured her. "We were just talking." Her gaze fell on the watch in Theodore's hands. "What is it?" "Son, grandfather gave me my great-great-grandfather's watch," Theodore proudly announced. "It's almost 100 years old." Sabrina pressed her lips together. "It's a pretty little thing," she said with obvious disapproval. "Theodore, go help set the table. Dinner's almost ready." When Theodore reluctantly left the room, Sabrina lingered in the doorway. "You know, Ebner," she said coldly, "you may think this is a valuable gift, but Theodore needs modern things. An iPad, a video game console, fancy clothes. Something that will help him fit into society, not stand out like—" She hesitated, searching for a word. "Like someone from a different era." She walked out without waiting for my answer. I remained sitting on the bed, feeling the anger rising inside me. Fancy clothes to fit into society? What kind of values are they instilling in my grandson? Half an hour later, I came down for dinner. The dining room shone with crystal and silver. The turkey on a huge platter looked as flawless as a magazine cover. The whole family was already seated at the table. Quentin at the head, Sabrina to his right, Theodore to his left. A seat was reserved for me at the end of the table, as if I were an occasional guest, not the host's father. "There's our guest of honor," Sabrina said with a strange smile. "Have a seat, Ebner." I took my seat, feeling the tension in the air. Theodore smiled across the table at me, furtively showing me that his watch was hidden in his pants pocket. Quentin raised his wine glass. "Well, let's get started. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." The dinner took place in a strange atmosphere. Sabrina kept the small talk going, talking about her charity committee, the new gym she and her friends visited 3 times a week, her plans for a Christmas vacation in Switzerland. Quentin was mostly silent, only occasionally inserting comments about work and a new partner in the firm. I was asked polite questions, but no one seemed interested in my answers. When I started to talk about a new book I'd read, Sabrina gently but insistently turned the conversation to another topic. "By the way, Ebner," she said as we moved on to dessert, "Quentin and I have been meaning to ask for a long time. Have you ever thought about moving into a nursing home? There are some really nice facilities where they'll take care of you." I almost choked on my pumpkin pie. "A nursing home? I'm only 68, and I'm in perfect health." Of course," Sabrina hastened to assure me. "But you live alone in an old house. What if you fall? Or get sick? Who would take care of you?" "I take care of myself just fine," I replied firmly. "And I don't plan to change where I live." "But your house is so—" She frowned. "It's not well maintained, and it's not the safest neighborhood." "Saltville is a quiet town," I countered, "and my house is comfortable enough for me." "My father was always modest about his needs," Quentin interjected with a slight sneer in his voice. "I remember asking for a new bicycle when I was a boy, and you made me save up for it. For a whole year I collected bottles and mowed the neighbors' lawns. And you were so proud when you finally bought it," I reminded you. "You took better care of it than any of your friends did of theirs." "Because I was afraid that if it broke, you wouldn't buy me a new one," Quentin parried. "Unlike the other parents." I felt the color rush to my face. Was this really how he perceived my lessons about the value of money and labor? As stinginess and indifference? "Mom, can I show Grandpa my new game console after dinner?" Theodore intervened, obviously trying to lighten the mood. "I don't think Grandpa's interested in that kind of thing," Sabrina replied. "Besides, we'll still have dessert. A special dessert." She exchanged quick glances with Quentin, and I caught the secret signal again. "I'll go check." Sabrina got up from the table and headed for the kitchen. There was an awkward pause. Quentin sipped his wine, avoiding my gaze. Theodore was fiddling with his napkin, obviously feeling the tension. "Dad," Quentin finally broke the silence, "have you ever thought that your way of life a little strange for a man of your age?" "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "Well, you live like a hermit. Old house, old car, old clothes, no entertainment, no traveling. I understand it's been hard on you since Mom died, but it's been 5 years. I live my life the way I'm comfortable," I replied, "and I don't see anything strange about it." "It's not just about comfort," Quentin continued. "It's about the impression you make on others. When my coworkers ask about you, embarrassed to tell them. Awkward? I felt something cold clench in my chest. "You're embarrassed about your father?" Quentin sighed as if explaining the obvious to a child. "Understand, everyone in my circle is successful. Everyone has wealthy parents who travel the world, golf, live in upscale neighborhoods. And you, and I'm just an old man who doesn't fit into your picture of the perfect life," I finished for him. "I didn't say that," Quentin frowned, "but I implied it." At that moment, Sabrina returned, carrying a large cake. She was followed by 2 women in attendant uniforms, obviously hired for the party. "And here's the special dessert," she announced with a smile. The cake was elaborately decorated with cream and candles, but when Sabrina placed it in front of me, I froze with shock. The inscription on the cake read, "The beggarliest old man alive." "Mine is surprise," Sabrina exclaimed. "We decided to add a little humor to the celebration." Quentin laughed. Sabrina laughed too. Even the hired waitresses giggled. Only Theodore sat with a look of horror on his face. Is this a joke? I squeezed out, feeling the color of shame flood my face. Of course it's a joke. Sabrina clapped her hands together. You were always so proud of your frugality. We decided to celebrate. Huh, come on, Dad, don't take offense. Quentin patted my shoulder. It was just a harmless joke. You always said humor is important in a family. I stared at the inscription on the cake and felt something inside me break. All the pain, all the frustration I'd been holding back for years suddenly burst out. A harmless joke? My voice shook. You humiliate me at the holiday table and you think it's a joke? Sabrina's smile faded. Ebner, you're overreacting. It's Thanksgiving. A time for fun. A time for fun? I got up from the table. You invited me here to make fun of me? To show me again how pathetic and poor you think I am? Dad, calm down. Quentin got up too. Aha, Sham, nobody thinks you're pathetic. It's just that you've always been frugal to the extreme. It's part of your character. My image? I was almost screaming now. You don't know anything about my real image. You only see what you want to see. Grandpa, please don't be upset. Theodore looked frightened. I'm sure Mom and Dad didn't mean to hurt you. They knew exactly what they were doing. I turned to my grandson. But you know what, Theo? Your parents are wrong. I'm not a poor old man. I never was. What do you mean? Sabrina laughed nervously. You live in a tiny house, drive a wreck, wear clothes that are 20 years old. Because I chose to, I interrupted her. Not because I couldn't afford it otherwise. It's because those things don't matter to me. There was silence in the room. Quentin looked at me in disbelief. What are you talking about, Dad? I took a deep breath. The moment of truth had come, and there was no turning back. I'm a millionaire, Quentin. A dollar millionaire. I've been a millionaire for a long time. My son's face widened in shock. What? I started investing before you were born, I continued, feeling strangely relieved by the truth. First in real estate, then in stocks. My first major success was buying shares in a technology company in the 80s. Now my investment portfolio is worth an amount that almost made Sabrina faint. But, Quentin stammered. Why do you live like a poor man? I grinned bitterly. Because money has never been an end in itself for me. It was just a means of security and independence. I've always valued simplicity, sincerity, human relationships over material goods. You're lying, Sabrina finally found her voice. It's impossible. If you had that kind of money, you wouldn't be living in that wreck and driving that old Honda. I can prove every word of it, I replied. One call to my attorney, Walter P. Blody, and he'll back up what I say. I can show you account statements, stock records, anything. Quentin sank slowly into a chair, his face pale. All these years, you could have given me everything I wanted, everything I dreamed of, but instead you made me mow the neighbors' lawns for a pittance? I was trying to teach you the value of work and money, I explained. I was trying to show you that true happiness is not about material possessions. But why didn't you tell us? There was resentment in Quentin's voice. Why did you hide it? I looked at my son, at his wife, at their luxurious house bought on credit, at their life on display. Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for my money, I answered quietly. I wanted to make sure my family valued me as a person, not as a source of funding. And as we proved today, Quentin chuckled bitterly, you were right to hide the truth. Sabrina finally came to her senses and rushed over to me with a fake smile. Ebner, darling, we've always appreciated you. This cake is just a silly joke, a misunderstanding. Of course, we never thought you were poor or pathetic. Her sudden change of heart was so obvious, so insincere, that I felt an attack of nausea. Don't, Sabrina, I held up my hand, stopping her. Don't humiliate me or yourself. You've both shown your true feelings for me. And you know what? I'm grateful for that. It was finally clear. I turned to Theodore, who was watching with wide open eyes. Theo, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad I saw you. Take care of the watch. It's really special. Are you leaving? He asked fearfully. Yes, I nodded. I think I should go. But you can't just leave, Sabrina protested. We have to talk to discuss your investments, your plans. I could see the greed in her eyes that wasn't even trying to hide. That was the last straw. We have nothing to talk about. I cut her off. I'm going home. As I headed for the exit, Quentin followed me. Dad, wait, he grabbed my hand. You can't just leave like that, not after a revelation like that. I looked at my son, a successful lawyer, a father of a family, a grown man. And I saw in him the same boy who was ashamed of me in front of his friends, who saw my lessons about the value of money as a manifestation of stinginess and lack of love. I can, Quentin, I said quietly. And I'm leaving. You and Sabrina have made it clear how you feel about me. Money won't change that. But it changes everything, he exclaimed. You can move into a nice house, buy a decent car, travel. I've been able to do that for years, I replied. But I don't want to. And the fact that you still don't realize that speaks for itself. I stepped out onto the porch, feeling the cold November wind chill me to the bone. I could hear Quentin and Sabrina's voices behind me, arguing about something, but I couldn't make out the words. I got into my trusty Honda, started the engine, and slowly pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw Theodore run out onto the porch and wave at me. I waved back, feeling tears come to my eyes. Thanksgiving hadn't ended at all the way I'd expected. But maybe it needed to. Perhaps we'd all lived under illusions about our family for too long. And now that the truth has been revealed, it's time to face reality and decide what to do next. I spent a sleepless night in a motel on the outskirts of Riverbend. I didn't want to drive back to Saltville in the dark, and my state of mind didn't lend itself to a long trip. The room was clean but impersonal, white walls, standard furniture, a TV I didn't even turn on. Lying on the hard bed, I replayed the events of the evening over and over in my head, every word, every look. The morning greeted me with a headache and a feeling of desolation. I ordered coffee at the small motel cafe and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. People were rushing about their business, unaware of the dramas playing out behind closed doors. My phone rang at 8 in the morning. I wasn't surprised to see Quentin's name on the screen. I stared at the blinking display for a while, wondering if I should answer. Finally, I decided. "Good morning, Quentin," I said in a neutral tone. "Dad!" My son's voice sounded agitated. "Where are you? We've been worried all night." It's funny how sudden this "we were worried" thing was. Just yesterday, they didn't care how I got home after their joke. "I'm at the Pine Forest Motel," I replied. "I decided to spend the night here instead of driving in the dark." "A motel?" Quentin sounded genuinely indignant. "Why? You could have come back to our place. We have plenty of room." After last night, I grinned involuntarily. I don't think that would have been comfortable for either of us. There was a short pause. I heard Quentin cover the phone with his hand and say something, probably to Sabrina. "Look, Dad," he continued in a different tone, "about yesterday, Sabrina and I want to apologize. That cake was a terrible, unforgivable mistake. We didn't think about how it would hurt you." "Is that all you want to apologize for?" I asked quietly. "For the cake?" There was a pause again. I could almost see Quentin wrinkling his forehead, trying to figure out what else was required of him. "Not just for the cake, of course," he said finally, "to everything. For the way we've treated you over the years. We've been ungrateful." The last word sounded fake, like a learned phrase. I could almost hear Sabrina telling him what to say. "We want to make amends," Quentin continued. "Come over for dinner tonight. No jokes, no cake. Just a family lunch." "And what's changed since yesterday? I asked you straight out. Why the sudden desire to see me at his table?" "Dad, you're being unfair." Quentin's voice had a touch of resentment in it. "Yes, we were shocked by your revelation, but that doesn't change the fact that you're my father, and we want to make things right." I almost laughed at this attempt to turn the situation around, to make me look guilty. Typical lawyer's trick. "Quentin," I said calmly, "let's be honest with each other. If I hadn't told you about my condition yesterday, you wouldn't be calling today to apologize, wouldn't you?" The silence was more eloquent than any answer. "Theo wants to see you," Quentin finally said, changing tactics. He was upset about the way things had turned out. The mention of my grandson had struck a nerve. Theodore really wasn't to blame, and I didn't want him to suffer because of the adult discord. All right, I decided, I'll come over for dinner, but only for Theodore's sake. Good. The relief in Quentin's voice was almost palpable. Sabrina will cook something special. We'll expect you at 2. After the conversation was over, I sat staring out the window for a long time. Something told me this wasn't just a family dinner. Quentin and Sabrina must be up to something. Now that they knew about my condition, their attitude toward me had changed dramatically. But have they changed themselves? I paid for my coffee and headed to the motel to pack. There were a few hours before lunch, and I decided to spend them walking around Riverbend. I needed to think, to clear my head. Riverbend was a beautiful city with neat streets and manicured parks. I walked past the elite private school where Theodore attended, past the golf club where I knew Quentin spent weekends with clients. This whole world of luxury and prestige was so far from my values. In the small park, I sat down on a bench and pulled out my cell phone. 10 missed calls, 3 from Quentin, 7 from Sabrina, and then a message from an unfamiliar number. Grandpa, it's Theo. I took a friend's cell phone to text you. I'm really sorry about yesterday. Please come over today. That message touched me more than all the calls from Quentin and Sabrina. My grandson was really worried about our relationship. At 2 o'clock, I pulled up to my son's house. This time I was greeted by all 3 of them. Quentin, Sabrina, and Theodore stood on the porch with strained smiles. Only Theodore's smile seemed genuine. Daddy, Quentin stepped forward and hugged me tightly. I'm so glad you came. This sudden physical contact surprised me. Quentin hadn't hugged me in years. Ebner, Sabrina also moved in for a hug, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. We were so worried. How are you feeling? Fine, I answered, pulling away a little. Their sudden concern seemed unnatural, almost frightening. Grandfather, Theodore rushed to me with genuine joy. You're back. I hugged my grandson, feeling the tension release a little. Yeah, of course I'm back, I promised. The house looked different inside, fresh flowers in vases, photos arranged, which to my surprise included old pictures of Viola and me. Where had they gotten them from? I didn't remember giving them those pictures. We thought it was time to put the family photos back where they belonged, Sabrina explained, catching my eye, to make you feel at home. I nodded without saying a word. It all seemed like a poorly staged play. Lunch was served in the dining room with the same care as last night's dinner, but now I was seated at Quentin's right hand in a place of honor. I made your favorite roast beef, Sabrina announced, placing a plate in front of me. Quentin mentioned that you've always loved it. I wondered when Quentin had mentioned that, and since when did Sabrina memorize such details about my preferences? Thank you, I smiled politely. It looked appetizing. The conversation at the table was strained. Quentin and Sabrina avoided any mention of last night's incident, instead showering me with questions about my well-being, my home in Saltville, my plans for the future. Their sudden interest in my life was as unexpected as it was insincere. You know, Dad, Quentin cut off a piece of roast beef. Sabrina and I have been thinking. Your house in Saltville is so old, it's probably in need of constant repair. Maybe you should think about moving. Moving? I raised an eyebrow. Where to? No. Well, Quentin exchanged a quick glance with his wife. There are some great options here in Riverbend. Senior condos with great views and all the amenities. Don't call it for seniors, Sabrina quickly interjected. This is luxury housing for people who value comfort and security, with concierge, pool, spa, and close to us, Quentin added with a smile, we could see each other every day. I put my fork down slowly. Yesterday you were offering me a nursing home. Today a luxury condominium. That's an interesting evolution. Sabrina blushed slightly. Ebner, yesterday was a misunderstanding. We never thought you needed a nursing home. We were just concerned for your safety. Are you still concerned now? I asked you directly. Of course we are, Quentin exclaimed. You're my father. I've always worried about you. But that worry didn't used to translate into offers to move, I remarked. What's changed, Quentin? My son hesitated, clearly not ready for a direct confrontation. Dad, listen, he finally said. I know that Sabrina and I haven't always been attentive to your needs, But right now, we really want to make it up to you. We want you around so we can take care of you. My finances too? I couldn't resist the question. There was an awkward silence. Theodore shifted his gaze from his parents to me and back again, clearly sensing the tension. What does this have to do with finances? Sabrina laughed nervously. We're talking about family, about caring. Of course, I nodded. That's why yesterday you were laughing at the poorest old man, and today you're offering luxury housing. Grandpa, Theodore intervened quietly. They're really sorry. Mom cried all night. I looked at my grandson, at his sincere face. He really believed in his parents' remorse, or wanted to. I appreciate what you're saying, Theo, I said softly, and I know you speak from the heart. We all speak from the heart, Quentin persisted. Dad, give us a chance to make things right. I sighed. Part of me wanted to believe that my son was truly repentant, that he'd finally realized the value of family bonds beyond material possessions. But the other part, the more rational part, saw the falsity in his eyes, in his gestures, in the very atmosphere of this house. All right, I said at last. I'll think about your proposal. The relief on Quentin and Sabrina's faces was too obvious. They were clearly expecting a quicker agreement. After lunch, Sabrina suggested coffee in the living room. While she was preparing the drinks, Quentin suddenly remembered an urgent work call and apologized. I was left alone with Theodore. How are you, Grandpa? He asked quietly, sitting down next to me on the couch. Are you very upset about yesterday? I looked at my grandson, at his worried face, and felt my heart clench with tenderness. It was unpleasant, I admitted, but I'll get over it. Don't worry about me. I didn't know about the cake. Theodore lowered his eyes. I swear I would never. I know, Theo. I put my hand on his shoulder. It had nothing to do with you. The boy was quiet for a moment, rubbing the sleeve of his sweater. Is it true that you're rich? He finally asked in a whisper. I smiled involuntarily. At his age, the word millionaire sounded almost dreamlike. I have money, yes, I confirmed. But you know, Theo, wealth isn't just about money. It's also what you do with it, what value it brings you. Like your great-grandfather's watch? Theodore took out of his pocket the pocket watch I gave him. It's valuable not because it's expensive, but because it's special, isn't it? Exactly, I was touched by his understanding. You're very wise for your age, Theo. He smiled, clearly pleased with the praise. Mom says we can go to Disneyland now, he said suddenly, and that you're going to buy me a new telescope, the best one. My heart sank. So Sabrina had already started making plans with my money and had even gotten Theodore involved. Theo, I chose my words carefully, don't believe everything adults say, especially when it comes to other people's money. He frowned, not quite understanding. But you're my grandfather. Isn't that other people's money? At that moment, Sabrina returned with a tray of coffee cups and a plate of cookies. What are you two talking about? She asked with feigned ease. Grandfather told me about the watch. Theodore quickly answered, hiding it in his pocket. Oh, that old trinket. Sabrina set the tray on the table. You know, Ebner, if you want to give Theo a really valuable gift, maybe you should think about something more modern, like a new smartphone or the latest game console. Mom, Theodore was outraged. I like watches. Of course you do, dear, Sabrina patted him on the head. But imagine all the fun things you could do with a new phone or computer. I watched the scene in silence, feeling the anger building up inside. It hadn't even been 24 hours since my revelation, and Sabrina was already trying to use me as a source of expensive gifts. Theo, I turned to my grandson, ignoring Sabrina. Why don't you show me your room? You said you wanted to show me something. I do, the boy said excitedly. I have some new astronomy books. We went upstairs, leaving Sabrina with her coffee and a disgruntled look on her face. Theodore's room was spacious, with a large window and a desk against the wall. There were books on the shelves. Lots of books, which pleasantly surprised me. In the corner, I noticed a telescope, not the most expensive, but decent enough for a budding astronomer. Here, look. Theodore pulled a thick atlas of the stars from the shelf. I got it for my birthday. It has all the constellations and planets and even distant galaxies. We spent almost an hour looking at books and discussing astronomy. Theodore showed me his observation notes and told me about the planets he had already seen through the telescope. His enthusiasm was contagious, and for a while I forgot about the tense situation downstairs. But reality returned when there was a knock on the door, and Quentin appeared on the doorstep. "There you are," he said with a strained smile. "Theo, Mom's asking you to come down. She needs help in the kitchen." Theodore reluctantly closed the book. "But Grandfather and I—" "Go on, Theo," I said softly. "We'll talk again." When the boy went out, Quentin closed the door and turned to me. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk." "About what?" I crossed my arms across my chest. "About your finances," Quentin said bluntly. "I understand that you wanted to keep them private, and I respect that decision. But now that the truth is out, we need to talk about the future." "My future?" I clarified. "Our future together," Quentin corrected me. "You're not getting any younger, Dad. Who will manage your assets if something happens to you?" "That's it. The real reason for the sudden concern." "I have an attorney," I replied. "Waldorf P. Blody. He's been doing fine for 30 years. A solicitor's good," Quentin nodded. "But family is family. I'm a lawyer, Dad. I could help with your asset management, tax planning, investment strategy." "Since when are you interested in investments?" I asked ironically. "I remember when you thought my economics classes were a waste of time." Quentin blushed slightly. "People change, Dad. I was a stupid teenager. Now I'm a grown man with education and experience. And suddenly interested in my finances, I finished for him." "Not just your finances," Quentin countered. "Your well-being in general. You are my father, after all." I looked at my son, at his handsome, handsome face, and saw him as a stranger, a man who was only interested in money and status. What had I done wrong in raising him? Where did I go wrong? "Quentin," I finally said, "I appreciate your concern, but my finances are my own business. I'll decide what I want to do with them." "But Dad—" "This conversation is over." I stood up, signaling that the subject was closed. Quentin looked at me with poorly concealed disappointment. Then he nodded and left the room without another word. I was alone, looking at Theodore's books, at his telescope, at the star chart on the wall. In this room full of dreams and curiosity, I suddenly felt more at home than anywhere else in this huge mansion. Going downstairs, I found that Sabrina had organized an impromptu family photo album viewing party. On the coffee table were old albums I hadn't seen in years. "Ebner, come join us," she called out with fake enthusiasm. "We found these albums in the attic. So many memories." I sat in the chair watching Sabrina look with exaggerated interest at the pictures of young Viola and me. Our wedding, Quentin's early years. "You were such a beautiful couple," she commented, "and Quentin is such a cute baby." "Look, Theo, that's your dad at your age." Theodore looked at the pictures with genuine interest, asking questions about people and places. Quentin sat next to me, occasionally inserting a comment, but mostly silent, avoiding my gaze. This whole scene of family idol looked so fake that I could hardly restrain myself from getting up and leaving. But for Theodore's sake, I stayed, answering questions, even smiling when propriety demanded it. When darkness fell, I announced that it was time for me to return to Saltville. "But it was getting late," Sabrina protested. "Stay the night. The guest room is all yours." "Thank you, but I'd rather go home," I said firmly. "I have business in Saltville tomorrow." "What kind of business?" Quentin asked quickly. "Maybe I can help." "Nothing urgent," I said evasively, "just routine." The goodbye was strained. Sabrina hugged me a little too tightly, whispering in my ear, "We're so glad you're back with us, Ebner." Quentin shook my hand, promising to visit me in Saltville soon. Only Theodore's hug was genuine. "Come again, Grandpa," he begged. "I'll show you the stars through the telescope." "I will, Theo," I promised, touched by his words. As I pulled out of the driveway of their house in the car, I noticed Quentin and Sabrina arguing animatedly on the porch. Their gestures were emotional, their faces tense. The family idyll crumbled as soon as I left the scene. The drive home was long and quiet. I drove, immersed in thoughts of what had happened over the 2 days. About the cake with the offensive inscription, about the sudden revelation, about the drastic change in Quentin and Sabrina's behavior, about how quickly their contempt had been replaced by ingratiating politeness, how greed had clearly shone through the mask of concern. And Theodore. about his genuine joy at the antique clock, about his fascination with astronomy, about his desire to save up for a telescope instead of asking his parents for expensive gifts, about how he, the only one in this family, kept his soul pure and his feelings sincere. Something had to be done. I couldn't just go back to my old life, pretend nothing had happened. I couldn't let Quentin and Sabrina use me as a source of funding for their ambitions. And I couldn't let Theodore grow up to be like his parents. Cynical, materialistic, empty inside. By the time I reached Saltville, a plan had begun to form in my head. A radical plan that would change our family dynamic once and for all. A plan that would make Quentin and Sabrina realize the true cost of their actions, and perhaps help Theodore grow up to be a decent man, despite his parents' influence. I'll call Waldor P. Bloody tomorrow and make an appointment. It's time to revise my will. The morning was unusually clear for November. The sun shone through the curtains, painting golden streaks on my bedroom floor. I woke up early as usual, but for the first time in a long time, I felt strangely light. It was as if I'd finally shed the heavy weight I'd been carrying on my shoulders for years. At night, I dreamed of Viola. She was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, knitting as she had done all our lives together. "Ebner," she said without lifting her eyes from her needles, "sometimes you have to let go in order to move on." I woke with a sense of her presence, with the light scent of lavender, her favorite perfume, in the air. I got up, brewed some coffee, and walked out onto the porch. My little house in Saltville seemed especially cozy after the cold luxury of Quentin's mansion. Everything here had a story. Every corner held memories. The massive rocking chair Viola had found at a garage sale and restored with her own hands. The rug by the door, brought back from our only trip to Mexico together. The old clock on the wall, inherited from my father. I sipped my coffee, watching the neighbor's cat sneaking along the fence, and thought about what I was going to do. The decision hadn't come spontaneously. It had been maturing for years, ever since I began to notice the kind of person my son was becoming. The incident with the cake and the subsequent fake remorse only confirmed what I already knew deep down. Quentin had never shared my values or understood my philosophy of life. After finishing my coffee, I went back into the house and pulled a business card for Waldor P. Bloody out of my desk drawer. My old friend and attorney was one of the few people who knew about my condition. We'd met in college, where we'd studied economics together, but our paths had diverged after graduation. I chose a modest job and secret investments. He chose a legal career. We met again 20 years ago when I needed a trusted lawyer to handle some transactions. Since then, Waldor had handled all my financial and legal affairs, becoming not only an attorney, but a close friend. I dialed his number, knowing he was already in the office at 8 in the morning. Waldor was always an early bird. "Waldor P. Bloody," a familiar voice answered after the first dial tone. "Waldor, it's Ebner." "Ebner!" There was surprise in his voice. "What a pleasant surprise. You rarely call this early. I need to see you." I cut right to the chase. "It's urgent. Today, if possible." There was a brief pause. Waldor must have been looking at his calendar. "I have a meeting at 10 and lunch with a client at 1, but I can make time at 3 in the afternoon. Would that work for you?" "Perfect," I replied. "I'll be in your office." "Is something wrong?" Waldor sounded worried. "Yes," I said simply. "I'll tell you when I see you." After the call, I went about my daily business, trying to get my mind off my heavy thoughts. I washed the dishes, swept the porch, checked the mail. Among the bills and sales brochures was a postcard from Theodore, sent before my Thanksgiving visit. "Dear Grandpa," he wrote in his neat teenage handwriting, "I'm so glad you're coming to visit us. I have a lot to tell you. Your Theo." Attached to the card was a drawing of a starry sky with the constellation sign. I smiled, looking at the carefully drawn lines and dots. My grandson, the only ray of light in this story. At 3:30, I got into my Honda and headed for downtown Saltville, where the old brick building housed the office of the law firm of P. Bloody and Associates. Waldor, despite his success and fortune, preferred to stay in the small town where he was born and raised. "Why do I need skyscrapers when I can see the woods from my window?" he used to say when someone marveled at his choice. Waldor's office was on the second floor and was decorated in a classic style. Oak paneling, leather chairs, bookcases filled with legal tomes. The receptionist, an older woman named Doris, who had worked with Waldor for what seemed like an eternity, smiled welcomingly at me. "Mr. Hawksworth, haven't seen you in a while. Mr. P. Blody's expecting you. Come in." Waldor met me at the door of his office. He was a tall, thin man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and shrewd blue eyes behind old-fashioned glasses. We were the same age, but he always looked a little older, perhaps because of that beard and his ever-serious expression. "Dash Ebner," he shook my hand firmly. "It's good to see you. Come in, sit down." I sank into the comfortable chair across from his desk. Waldor sat down in his seat and looked at me carefully. "So what happened? You're not the type to demand an emergency meeting without a good reason." I took a deep breath and began to tell him about the Thanksgiving invitation, about the coal reception, about the cake with the offensive inscription, about how I had revealed the truth about my condition, and about the drastic change in Quentin and Sabrina's behavior. About their attempts to manipulate me, about the conversation with Quentin about managing my assets. Waldor listened in silence, nodding only occasionally. His face grew darker and darker as I told him. "And now," I finished, "I want to change my will. Completely." Waldor took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. "I've always told you that your secrecy about your finances could get you into trouble," he said finally. "But even I didn't expect this. I thought I'd raised my son better," I said bitterly. "I thought my lessons with Viola about the value of hard work and modesty had paid off." "Don't blame yourself," Waldor shook his head. "Children sometimes choose the opposite path from their parents, just out of a spirit of contradiction. Quentin has always been ambitious. That's putting it mildly," I grinned unhappily. "He and his wife see me only as a purse, and they're trying to use even my grandson as leverage. What about the boy?" Waldor adjusted his glasses. "Dash Theodore, right? What's he like?" My face softened at the mention of my grandson. "He's different, Waldor. He has sincerity, curiosity, kindness. I see more of Viola in him than I do of Quentin or Sabrina. He's the only one who was genuinely glad I came, the only one who appreciated my gift of my grandfather's old pocket watch." "Then all is not lost," Waldor said thoughtfully. "The boy may grow up to be a good man, in spite of his parents' influence. If he has help," I nodded, "and that's part of my plan." Waldor pulled a folder of my files out of his desk drawer. "Let's take a look at your current will," he said, flipping through the papers. "Right now, the bulk of your estate should go to Quentin, with a small trust for Theodore's education." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And I want to change that. I want to change it dramatically." Waldor put the folder aside and picked up a blank sheet of paper. "I'm listening." "First, Quentin and Sabrina should get nothing," I said firmly. "Not a dime." Waldor made a notation without showing surprise. "Second, I want to set up a trust fund for Theodore, but with conditions. He will have access to the funds only after he is 30 and only if he lives independently of his parents. No working for Quentin's companies, no joint business. He has to find his own way." "It may be complicated legally," Waldor said, "but I'll find a way. How much money do you want to set aside for this trust?" "I've named a sum, generous enough to provide Theodore with a comfortable life, but not so huge as to ruin it." "And the rest?" Waldor asked. "Given the size of your fortune, even after a generous trust for your grandson, there would be a substantial sum left over." I smiled, feeling confident in my decision for the first time in days. "The rest will go to charity. I want to create a fund to support children from low-income families, scholarships for talented students, grants for educational programs, funding for children's hospitals and orphanages." Waldor nodded slowly, making notes. "A worthy goal." "Have you come up with a name for the foundation yet?" I thought for a moment. "The Viola Hawksworth Foundation," I finally said. "My wife had always wanted to help children. She used to volunteer at the children's library, remember?" "I remember." Waldor smiled softly. She was an amazing woman. She would have loved this idea. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the details of the new will. Waldor meticulously wrote down all my wishes, asking clarifying questions, suggesting legal language that would make the document as secure as possible from challenge. Quentin will try to contest the will, Waldor warned me. He's a lawyer and a good one. He'll claim that you were incapacitated or that you were pressured. That's why I'm here, I said. You're the best lawyer I know. Make sure my judgment is legally impeccable. Waldor nodded, accepting the compliment. I'll have a draft prepared by the end of the week. I also recommend a medical examination to document your excellent mental health, and it would be a good idea to record a video message where you explain the reasons for your decision. All of this will strengthen the position in the event of a lawsuit. I'll do whatever it takes, I agreed. When can we sign the final version? In a week, I think, Waldor replied. I'll use Margaret from the probate department. She's a specialist in complex cases, but I'll handle all confidential information personally. When the details were finalized, Waldor leaned back in his chair and gave me a long look. Are you sure, Ebner? This is a serious step. To completely disinherit your son? I'm sure, I answered firmly. Quentin made his choice a long time ago. He chose material values over family values. He chose status over sincerity. I can't change him, but I can discourage what he's become. Waldor nodded, accepting my decision. What about the house, he asked. Your house in Saltville is part of the inheritance too, I wondered. My cozy little house full of memories of Viola, of our life together. The house would go into the foundation too, I decided. All right, Farn, let them turn it into a small community center for children, a library or something. Viola would love that. What about you? Waldor asked gently. Are you planning on moving? That question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about moving. My house was my fortress, my refuge from the world. I don't know, I answered honestly. There are no concrete plans yet. In that case, Waldor made another note, we'll include a clause in the will that the house passes to the foundation only after your death. Until then, you can live there, or dispose of it as you see fit. We talked a little more about the technicalities, then Waldor walked me to the door. I'll call you when the paperwork's ready, he said, shaking my hand in farewell. And Ebner, hang in there. I know this isn't an easy decision. I nodded, grateful for his understanding, and walked outside. The day was slipping towards evening, the sun already hidden behind the rooftops, coloring the sky orange and pink. I walked to my car, feeling a strange mix of emotions, sadness at the need for such drastic measures, relief at the decision I'd made, anxiety about Theodore's future. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe on the outskirts of town where Viola and I often had lunch on weekends. I ordered her favorite apple pie and a cup of mint tea. Sitting by the window, I mentally talked to her, as I had done so often since she left. Am I doing the right thing, Viola? I asked, looking out at the sunset. Would you approve of my decision? I could almost hear her answer. You've always been a fair man, Ebner. Do what you think is right, but not out of anger or resentment, but out of love. Out of love. Yeah, that was the key. I wasn't changing my will out of a desire to punish Quentin, but out of love for the values that Viola and I had carried through life. Out of love for Theodore, who I wanted to give a chance to grow up to be a different person from his parents. Out of love for those unknown children who would be helped by Viola's foundation. When I got home, I found 3 messages on my answering machine. 2 from Quentin, 1 from Sabrina. They wondered if I had gotten there safely and just wanted to make sure I was okay. Sabrina mentioned some kind of family dinner next weekend that they would really like to see me at. I didn't bother returning the call. Instead, I pulled an old photo album out of the closet and spent the evening looking at snapshots of Viola and I's youth. Our wedding, modest and warm. Quentin's birth, how happy I was, holding my firstborn in my arms. Quentin's first steps, his first bicycle, school plays, graduation. When and how did Viola and I miss the moment when our son began to turn into a man for whom material values became more important than spiritual ones? On one of the last pages, I found a picture I had almost forgotten. Viola, me and 10-year-old Quentin on a picnic by the lake. We are all smiling. Quentin holding a fish he had just caught, a small bass that he was so proud of. This was before he began to feel ashamed of our humble lifestyle, before he started avoiding bringing friends home. Something had happened between that happy boy in the picture and the cold, calculating man he had turned into. Something I couldn't prevent. I closed the album and put it back in the closet. The past can't be changed, but the future is still in my hands. And I will make sure my decisions serve the good, not feed greed and falsity. The phone rang just as I was about to go to bed. I picked it up, expecting to hear Quentin or Sabrina, but it was Theodore. Grandpa? His voice was quiet, as if he didn't want to be heard. It's me. Minus Theo. I couldn't hold back a smile. It's good to hear from you. How are you? I'm fine, he said quietly. Grandpa, I've been meaning to ask, are you really a millionaire? The directness of the question took me by surprise. I didn't expect my grandson to talk so openly about it. Yes, Theo, it's true, I answered honestly. And you lived in a small house and drove an old car all this time because you wanted to? Not because you couldn't afford more? That's right, I confirmed. Other things mattered to me, not the size of the house or the make of the car. Theodore was quiet for a moment, digesting the information. Mom and Dad talked about you all day today, he said finally, about how things are going to be different now. Mom said we're going to Europe next summer, all of us together, and that you were going to buy me a new computer and a telescope. I sighed. So Sabrina was already making plans with my money and involving Theodore in it. What do you want, Theo? I asked softly. Europe? A computer? A telescope? I don't know, the boy's voice sounded confused. A telescope would be great, of course. But, Grandpa, why didn't you tell me before? About the money, I mean. I wondered how to explain it to a 14-year-old. Because money changes people, Theo, I finally said. It changes the way they see you, the way they treat you. I wanted to be appreciated for who I was, not what I had. Like Mom and Dad are now, Theodore said quietly. And there was so much understanding in that phrase that my heart squeezed. You're very observant, I said, and smart beyond your years. Grandfather, Theodore said suddenly, can I come to you for the weekend? Alone without my parents, we could watch the stars. You have less light pollution there than in Riverbend. The suggestion took me by surprise, but it filled my heart with warmth. Of course, Theo, I replied. I'd be delighted. But what will your parents say? I'll ask, he said confidently. Right now, they agree to anything I ask. This phrase again showed how much my grandson understood the situation, and I was both sad and proud of him. Then it's a deal, I said. Call me when you decide with your parents. After talking to Theodore, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts about my grandson, about his future, kept me awake. I hoped that my decision to change the will would protect him from the worst aspects of Quentin and Sabrina's influence, that the terms of the trust would help him become independent, find his own way, that my fortune would not spoil him the way it spoils the money of so many young people who get it too easily. I thought about Viola's foundation, how many children it could help. My late wife always said that true wealth is not measured in dollars in an account, but in the amount of good you bring into the world. Now her name would be associated with good deeds, and it seemed right. As I fell asleep, I felt like I had made the right decision. For the first time in a long time, I was completely confident in my actions. Quentin and Sabrina wouldn't get a dime of my fortune. They had already shown that they only saw me as a source of money, not as a father and father-in-law. Their fake concern, their clumsy attempts to make amends after the revelation of my wealth only confirmed my worst fears. But Theodore was different. In him, I saw a glimmer of hope, an echo of the values Viola and I had tried to instill in Quentin, and that glimmer was worth fighting for. It was worth changing my will, setting up a trust, establishing a foundation. It was worth it to make my money serve good instead of feeding greed and vanity. The spring wind fluttered the curtains in the wide windows of my new home. I sat on the terrace with a cup of morning coffee and watched the waves lapping at the sandy shore. It had been almost 4 months since that ill-fated Thanksgiving that had changed everything in my life. My new home stood on the rocky ocean front in the small town of Ocean View, 3 hours from Saltville and 5 from Riverbend. Far enough away from my past life, but not far enough to completely disconnect from my roots. It was a small but comfortable one-story cottage with a spacious living room, 2 bedrooms, and a terrace directly facing the ocean. Nothing flashy or ostentatious. Simple but quality things, cozy furniture, lots of light and air. Viola had always dreamed of a house by the ocean. Imagine Ebner, she used to say, waking up to the sound of the waves, seeing sunsets over the water, collecting seashells on the shore. We had planned to buy such a house after retirement, but her illness ruined those plans. Now I had realized our dream on my own, and although the joy was bittersweet, I felt Viola's presence in every corner of this house. The move happened almost spontaneously. After changing my will, I returned to my home in Saltville with the firm intention of continuing to live as before. But with each passing day, the walls of the old house pressed down harder on me, reminding me of the past, the disappointments, the toxic relationship with my son. The phone was ringing off the hook with calls from Quentin and Sabrina that I ignored. They even came over a few times, but I didn't open the door, watching through the curtain as they stood on the porch, conversing with growing irritation. The decision came unexpectedly. I was browsing through the morning paper and came across an ad for a house for sale in Ocean View. The picture of the modest cottage against the vast ocean stirred something in my soul. I called the realtor the same day, and a week later I was signing the purchase papers. The move took less time than I expected. I left most of the furniture and things from the old house. They were to become part of the community center that would be created there after my death according to the new will. I took with me only personal belongings, photographs, books, and a few items related to Viola, her rocking chair, a knitted plaid she had made with her own hands, a box with our letters and mementos. I didn't inform Quentin of the move. The only one who knew my new address was Theodore. After Thanksgiving, our bond with our grandson strengthened. He came to visit me in Saltville several times. Quentin and Sabrina didn't mind, hoping that through my son they could repair their relationship with me. Theodore would bring his telescope, and we would spend evenings watching the stars from the backyard. In those moments, there was a special bond between us that I missed so much with Quentin. When I decided to move, I told Theodore about it during one of his visits. The boy listened to me with an understanding far beyond his 14 years. "You want to get away from them, don't you, Grandpa?" he asked bluntly, looking at me with his serious eyes. "Not run away, Theo," I answered, choosing my words. "Rather to start a new chapter of life, in a place where there are no heavy memories." He nodded, accepting my explanation. "Will I be able to come visit you there?" "Sure." I put my hand on his shoulder. "It's a great place for stargazing. No light pollution." His face brightened. "What about your parents? Will you tell them where you're moving to?" I shook my head. "Not yet, no. Maybe later, maybe. Right now I need time and space to myself." Theodore nodded again, with the same unchildlike understanding. "I won't tell anyone," he promised. "It would be our secret." And he kept his word. In all those months, neither Quentin nor Sabrina ever found out where I lived. They called my cell phone, left messages on the answering machine at the Saltville house, wrote letters to my old address. At first, they were attempts at reconciliation, full of fake concern and transparent hints about my condition. Then the tone changed to a note of irritation, accusations that I was punishing the whole family for one stupid joke. Finally, their messages became overtly aggressive, with threats of legal action and checking my mental state. I didn't respond. Waldor, who was aware of my move, assured me that I was not legally obligated to give my son my new address or answer his calls. I was a capable adult and had every right to privacy. Theodore and I communicated regularly. I bought him a password-protected cell phone that he hid from his parents, and we called several times a week. He talked about school, about his observations of the stars, about his plans for the future. I listened, gave advice, but never imposed my opinion. I wanted him to learn to think for himself, to make decisions without looking to authority, even mine. Once a month, Theodore came to visit me for the weekend. Usually he told his parents he was going to science camp or astronomy observation with the school club. Quentin and Sabrina, busy with their own business and still hoping to reach me through their son, didn't check his stories too carefully. I'd meet Theodore at the bus station in Ocean View, and we'd spend weekends walking along the beach, watching the stars, talking about everything in the world. During these visits, I learned a lot about what had been going on at Quentin and Sabrina's house since my disappearance. At first, they were sure I would show up soon. After all, where could an old man go with his habits? Then they began to worry that I might have gotten sick or had an accident. Quentin even went to the police, but since I was making regular withdrawals and using my credit card, it was obvious that I was alive and well, I just didn't want to talk to my family. This realization infuriated them. According to Theodore, they often argued with each other, blaming each other for what had happened. Sabrina yelled that the cake idea was Quentin's stupidity. Quentin reminded her that she had always been dismissive of me. Their marriage, already not the strongest, was beginning to crack at the seams under the pressure of missed financial opportunities. I listened to these stories without gloating, but also without much sympathy. They were reaping the fruits of their own actions, and I could only hope that this experience would teach them something. Though frankly, I doubted it. What I was most concerned about was the effect it would have on Theodore. But the boy turned out to be remarkably resilient. He watched his parents' conflicts with the same detachment with which he studied the stars through his telescope, carefully, analytically, without letting his emotions cloud his judgment. "You know, Grandpa," he told me during one of his visits, "I used to think that when I grew up, I would be like Dad, successful, rich, with a big house and an expensive car. But now I'm not so sure." "What do you want now?" I asked, tensing inwardly. Theodore looked thoughtfully at the ocean. "I want to be happy, like you. You have money, but you don't make a cult out of it. You live the way you want to live, not the way others expect you to live." I felt a lump come up in my throat. This boy understood what my own son had not been able to understand in decades. "It's not an easy path, Theo," I said quietly. "It's always hard to go against the tide. But it's worth it, isn't it?" He looked at me hopefully. "Yes," I smiled. "Definitely worth it." In that moment, I was finally convinced that I'd made the right decision in changing my will. Theodore deserved a chance to be on his own, to live by his own rules, not the script his parents had written. The trust fund he would receive after 30 years, assuming he found his own way, independent of Quentin and Sabrina, was my contribution to his future. My new life in Ocean View turned out to be unexpectedly fulfilling. Contrary to my fears, I did not feel lonely or disconnected from the world. On the contrary, freeing myself from a toxic relationship with my son felt like I had lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders. I signed up to volunteer at the local library, where I spent 2 days a week helping catalog books and conducting readings for children. I got to know my neighbors, mostly retirees like me, who had moved to the ocean in search of peace. Started taking art classes at the local community center. Viola always said I had a talent that I was burying in the ground. But the most significant change was my work on the Viola Hawksworth Foundation. Together with Waldor, we developed the structure, mission, and operating principles of the foundation, which was to be launched after my death. But then I decided that there was no point in waiting. Why not see the fruits of my work in my lifetime? And so the foundation began to operate. At first on a small scale, scholarships for students from low-income families, grants for educational programs in schools in Saltville and surrounding areas. Then more ambitious projects, funding for a children's hospital, creating a network of public libraries in small towns, programs of additional education for gifted children from disadvantaged areas. I did not publicize my role in the foundation, remaining an anonymous benefactor. But working with the foundation gave me a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I had not experienced in a very long time. Every scholarship, every grant, every new opportunity for a child from a poor family was a living embodiment of the values that Viola and I have carried through our lives. One day, while looking through scholarship applications, I came across a familiar name. A girl named Chloe Moffat was Sabrina's niece, the daughter of her younger sister who, unlike my sister-in-law, had not made a favorable marriage and was raising her daughter alone. Chloe was a brilliant student who dreamed of studying astrophysics, but didn't have the means to attend a good university. I pondered for a long time what to do. On the one hand, the girl was a relative of Sabrina, with whom I had severed all ties. On the other, she was not guilty of her aunt's actions and deserved a chance to realize her potential. In the end, I decided to take up her case personally. The foundation awarded Chloe a full scholarship covering not only tuition, but also room, board, and study materials. I knew Sabrina would probably find out about it and draw her own conclusions, but I decided it didn't matter. What was important was to help a talented girl, regardless of her family ties. My routine at Ocean View was simple but enjoyable. Morning coffee on the terrace overlooking the ocean, then a walk along the shore, during which I collected interesting shells and sea glass. a new hobby that I was unexpectedly passionate about. Afternoons were spent working with foundation documents or volunteering at the library. Evenings were spent reading, drawing, or stargazing, especially on days when I called Theodore, and we studied the night sky together, albeit at a distance. On one such evening, sitting on the terrace with a telescope, I heard my cell phone ring. The number was unfamiliar, and I almost didn't answer, fearing it might be Quentin from the new number. But something made me press the answer button. Dash, dash. Hello? Mr. Hawksworth. There was a young woman's voice. It's Chloe Moffat. Yay! I received a scholarship from the Viola Hawksworth Foundation. I wasn't expecting that call. How did the scholarship girl get my number? Yes, Chloe, I answered cautiously. What can I do for you? I wanted to thank you personally. The girl's voice trembled with excitement. This scholarship has changed my life. I always wanted to study astrophysics, but I thought it was impossible. And now, how did you get my number? I interrupted, still wary. Theodore's, she admitted. He's my cousin. When I got the scholarship, Aunt Sabrina was strangely upset. She said it must have been your doing. I didn't know what she meant, but Theo explained, and gave me your number. I sighed. So Sabrina had guessed my role in the foundation. Well, that was to be expected. Theo shouldn't have given you my number without asking, I said, but without real reproach. But I'm glad the scholarship helped you. Your application was very strong. Thank you. There was genuine gratitude in her voice. Mr. Hawksworth, I know things are complicated between you and my aunt and Uncle Quentin right now, but I want you to know that not all of this family is like that. Some of us appreciate what you do. Those words touched me more than I expected. Thank you, Chloe, I said quietly. It means a lot to me. After that conversation, I often thought about Chloe, about Theodore, about the importance of not judging people by their family ties. Perhaps the next generation of our strange, disparate family would be able to avoid the mistakes of their parents. The months in Ocean View were adding up to a special, peaceful chapter of my life. I had not forgotten the past, but I had learned not to let it poison the present. I hadn't forgiven Quentin and Sabrina. It required their sincere remorse, not fake apologies motivated by greed. But I stopped being angry with them, stopped feeling bitter at the thought of how they had betrayed my trust. Instead, I focused on what I could control: my life, the work of the foundation, my relationship with Theodore, and found that the less I thought about Quentin and Sabrina, the easier it became to breathe. One warm May evening, I was sitting on the terrace watching the sun set over the ocean. The sun was slowly sinking toward the horizon, coloring the water in shades of pink and gold. Viola had always said that a sunset over water was like a window into another dimension, where time flowed differently. I thought of her, of our life together, of what she would say now, seeing me here in our dream home. Would she approve of my decisions? Breaking up with my son, changing my will, setting up a foundation? I wanted to believe she would. Viola had always valued sincerity and fairness above convention and social expectations. The phone on the table next to me vibrated. Another message from Quentin. I didn't bother to open it. Whatever it was, accusations, threats, attempts at reconciliation, it didn't matter anymore. I'd made my choice, and I wasn't going to change it. The sun touched the horizon line, casting a path of molten gold across the water. I remembered how Viola and I, still young, had stood on the ocean during our short honeymoon and dreamed of a house overlooking the sunset. One day, Ebner, she used to say as she hugged me, we'll sit on the terrace of our house and watch a sunset like that and know that we've lived life right. And there I sat on the terrace alone, but strangely not alone. My condition, which had been a secret for so long, now served a good purpose. My grandson, whom I had hardly known before, had become a close friend who shared my values. My life, which seemed to end with Viola's death, had taken on new meaning and direction. The sunset was fading, coloring the sky with dark purple tones. The first stars were beginning to show through on the eastern edge of the sky. I got up to adjust the telescope. Today, Theodore and I had agreed to observe Saturn, which was going to be especially visible. And at that moment, I felt an extraordinary peace. For the first time in years, I was sure that I had done the right thing, that my decisions, however painful, had been the right ones, that the money I had accumulated over a lifetime would go toward making the world a better place, not feeding greed and disrespect. Viola would be pleased, and I was finally pleased with myself. The telescope was pointed at the rising stars, the phone was silent, the ocean murmured beneath the terrace. A new chapter of my life was in full swing, and despite all the trials that had brought me here, I couldn't help but admit it was beautiful.